The 1973 album Raw Power by the Stooges was incredibly influential, but leading up to it, the band was scattered. They had officially broken up after the first two albums were released to little commercial success. Then, Iggy Pop got a phone call. It was his friend David Bowie, inviting him to London to record an album. Iggy called up former Stooges guitarist James Williamson to join him on the sessions. James was thrilled, since this would be his first time making a record.
I had never recorded anything before, and so this would be my first album. That was what was really exciting. David Bowie was really not broken in the U.S. at that point, so I had heard his charting single Changes, and it was fine, but he was not a big star at that point. So it was just another name as far as I was concerned. But the real excitement was recording an album.
The new iteration of the band, which featured brothers Scott Ashton on drums and Ron Ashton on bass, called themselves Iggy and the Stooges. They worked hard for 6 months in London, and the result was the 1973 album Raw Power, which contained songs like Gimme Danger, Raw Power, and Search and Destroy. Though it wasn't quite the success they were hoping for, the album, and Search and Destroy especially, would go on to be some of the most influential music ever recorded. Search and Destroy was written by Iggy and guitarist James Williamson. Williamson had played in the Stooges before this album, and for Iggy, bringing him to London was an easy choice. As Iggy once recalled, "The first time I heard him play, which was in a basement in Ann Arbor, he did something that later became known as punk or speed metal. A great number of chords, almost all at once, but which at the time came from no known musical vocabulary. His playing had dirt, but it did not lack authority. You could hear the intelligence in it." James Williamson cites a number of influences on this guitar part, but the first and perhaps most prominent is the Vietnam War. He wanted his guitar to emulate the sound of a machine gun.
So the Search and Destroy sound for, the machine gun is basically me imitating the machine gun by muffling the strings a little bit and down picking boo 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 like that, and it was close enough that we believed it.
Williamson took this idea and ran with it, incorporating other influences. But as Iggy remembers, he had to rein Williamson in a bit. "The funny part about it was until I convinced him to step back a little and ease up on the thing, what James brought in was 4 times as fast and twice as heavy." With the guitar part down, all that was left was to figure out the tone. When it came to gear, James Williamson only needed 2 things: a Les Paul and a VOX AC30.
I was about to record Raw Power. In fact, we were already in the studio, and I had been, previous to that, I had been playing Marshalls exclusively, and I was not all that pleased with the sound. The Marshall was kind of brittle sounding, and I was talking to the engineer one day, and he said, "Well, have you ever tried a VOX AC30? And I said, "No. Can I get one?" And he said, "Sure." He arranged for it, and the next day we had an English AC30 top boost, and that was it. After that, I played that exclusively throughout the rest of the album, and then whenever I could get a hold of one after that, I just plugged into the AC30 and cranked it, and so there was enough sustain within the combination of the Les Paul and the AC30 that I didn't need anything else. So I just played it straight through, no pedals, nothing. What made the sound right for us, I would say, is that it was. I mean, I once I heard the AC30, and this is in combination with my Les Paul, it was just an amazing sound. It had the growl and it had the bite with the top boost, but it also had a depth that I wasn't getting from other amps. It really had a dimension that other amps weren't offering in any way. And so, I was sold and am to this day.
After Iggy had unsuccessfully mixed the album himself, Bowie's management company insisted that Bowie mix it instead. Since they refused to release the album otherwise, Iggy agreed. Bowie mixing this song and album are what allowed Raw Power to be released, and while the situation may not have been ideal, James Williamson is grateful that the album got released at all.
Giving David Bowie his due, he actually came in and saved that album, the mix of that album. We were initially trying to do it ourselves, and it was just too much mix for us to handle. And we had made some technical errors in recording it. So there was a lot of leakage in the drums and in the bass into the drums. And so it was messed up in that way, and we couldn't very well, you couldn't use it in some cases because overdubs had new parts, but the drums still had the old parts in them, and so on. And so, David Bowie, when he went to do it, of course, he discovered this, and he, took the right approach, which was to keep the drums and bass down and just use the guitars and vocals. And, as a result of that, of course, my guitar sounded fantastic, because I was right there.
The album Raw Power and the song Search and Destroy were ahead of their time. Because of this, the album sold poorly, barely breaking into the Billboard Top 200, and the singles failed to chart at all. Though it didn't do well commercially, Raw Power ended up inspiring punk music, with the sound, the feel, the angst, and even the mix. Over 20 years after its initial release, Columbia Records invited Iggy Pop to remix the entire album for a CD re-release. Pop knew that if he declined, they would just remix it without him. So in 1997, the Iggy Pop remix of Raw Power was released.
On the other hand, when Iggy came to remix it and re-release it, he was really doing the album a favor because it was out of print. And so by remixing it, he got another issue of the record. The trouble is that Iggy is not he has many talents, but mixing is not one of them. And so I think it was just one of those, faders up, Mr. Engineer. And so there was some digital distortion on that mix and so forth that I couldn't, it was hard for me to listen to, but eventually I think they corrected it on another remaster. So, I can see what he was shooting for, trying to get more of the wildness into the mix. But I think that ultimately, as far as I'm concerned, the original Bowie mix is the preferred one because it's historically the one that everybody knows. And so, you gotta, how many times can you remix something? You gotta pick one. And I think that's the one I pick.
Whichever mix you prefer, the influence of this song is incredibly far-reaching and undeniable. Rolling Stone has ranked Search and Destroy among the 500 greatest songs of all time, and in 2010, the Stooges were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. With their album Raw Power, Iggy and the Stooges created an album and a sound that was ahead of its time. A sound so unique, it helped kickstart punk music around the world. And don't forget, there's nothing like a Vox.